This is Dateline News and Conversation. We're coming live tonight. My guest, Dimitri Lascaris. He's a lawyer. You know him. He's a journalist. He's an activist. He's somewhat of an expert on Palestine and has been following this for years. Dimitri, welcome back to the show.
Pleasure talking to you as always, my brother.
Well, I don't know. We're gonna experience some glitches with this live stuff. It's the first time we do it. Okay, we've got to talk about, and I need to have an update from you on everything that's swirling around and happening in the Middle East with regard to it's a genocide by Israel on Palestine. What's the latest that you're hearing? Is there any let up whatsoever from Israel, or are they still going full steam ahead, bombing innocent people? What's the latest on Rafa and what's going on there? Dimitri, bring me up to date.
I guess I'll start by referencing the submissions of the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, which concluded literally minutes ago. The United Nations Security Council on a debate relating to a resolution sponsored by Algeria that was intended to implement the January 26th decision of the International Court of Justice providing for provisional measures. And the Palestinian ambassador said that since that the decision on January 26th, Israel has killed nearly 4,000 more people in Gaza, the majority of whom are women and children, and has flagrantly violated the provisional measures that were ordered by a margin of 15-2 on that day. And as I've discussed with you previously, Regis, I think the most remarkable part of that decision was that every single every judge from a Western state or a Western allied state agreed that it was plausible that Israel was committing genocide and that the court should order provisional measures. And that means the judges from the United States, former State Department legal advisor under the Obama administration, the judge from Germany, highly pro-Israel state, the judge from France, highly pro-Israel state, Australia, Japan, and Slovenia. The fact that none of them dissented from that decision, I think, spoke volumes about the gravity of the evidence and the violations of international law that are taking place here. But Israel is flouting the decision. It now confronts another legal proceeding at the International Court of Justice, which started yesterday, which focuses not specifically on Gaza, but on the legality or illegality of its 50-plus year occupation of land that was set aside by the international community for a Palestinian state. There has been a decision since January 26th of a United States Federal District Court senior judge in a case brought by Palestinians against Anthony Blinken, Joe Biden, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, in which the judge said he agreed that it was plausible that Israel was committing genocide. And although he decided he didn't have the jurisdiction to give the injunctive relief that the plaintiffs requested, he implored, that's the word that he used, the Biden administration to re-evaluate its quote-unquote unflinching support for Israel's assault on Gaza. There was a decision of the Dutch Court of Appeal since January 26, barring the government of Netherlands from sending to Israel parts for F-35s because of the serious risk that the F-35s were being used in the commission of grave violations of international humanitarian law. The International Criminal Court's prosecutor, Karim Khan from Britain, finally came out and issued an unequivocal warning to Israel that people in the Israeli government and military who are violating international law will be held accountable. That's what he said. It remains to be seen whether he'll carry through and indict Israeli war criminals the way he indicted Vladimir Putin, but certainly he's using stronger language than he has in the past. So the legal noose is tightening around Israel's neck, but at the same time, the civilian casualties are soaring. Israel is thumbing its nose at the international community. thumbing its nose at the international legal architecture, at domestic courts, including those of Western states. And there's one reason and one reason only why it's getting away with this, Regis, and that's because of U.S. government and other Western government support for its genocidal assault on Gaza.
All right. I want to talk about the United States support. You know, this is no longer just getting me angry. It's making me sick to my stomach for what the American government has become, and for what I think now is got to be obvious to the entire world, what America is all about, and what America and its relationship with Israel is all about. What are your thoughts on how can the United States blatantly continue to do this? And it's not just giving them billions of dollars in money and aid and weapons. It's defending them at the United Nations. I can't believe the American people are so blind, deaf, and mute that they can't at least rise up in massive numbers and surround the White House. You were there last month, I think, for a huge demonstration. These things have got to continue. They can't be just a one and done. What are your thoughts?
It is sickening. I mean, I struggle to find the words every day, Regis, to describe I mean, there are no adjectives really that suffice to do justice to the utter and sheer moral depravity and bankruptcy of not only what Israel is doing, but U.S. government support. And let's be blunt here. I'm a Canadian citizen and citizen of Greece, and although my governments are not providing anywhere near the level of support that the United States government is, they are also entirely culpable in supporting Israel in a myriad of ways. In fact, the Trudeau government, it was discovered because of an intrepid journalist after October 7th, when the genocide began, authorized permits for the export of weapons to Israel in amounts that constitute a dramatic increase over prior issuances of permits for the delivery of weapons to Israel. Now, the weapons being sent by Canada are a drop in the bucket compared to what the United States is sending. But this complicity is Western-wide. The United States is leading it. The United States is by far the biggest enabler of it because of its military aid to Israel, $3.8 billion a year, another 16 or 17 billion since the genocide began. But the entire Western political elite is participating in this utter depravity, and it sickens me. Just sickens me. It should sicken us all. And it is sickening a lot of people. I mean, here in Canada, they just issued a poll. I found this astonishing, frankly, because the mainstream media in Canada is so pro-Israel. It's just as bad as the United States, and possibly even worse in terms of its entirely non-journalistic, in fact, journalistically malpractice coverage of this war, this so-called war on Palestinians. Despite all of that, the poll showed that 41% of Canadians believe that Israel is committing genocide, and only 32% disagreed. The rest were not sure. In the Liberal Party, the party that actually is the governing party in this country, the party of Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, the number was even higher. 44% of Liberal Party supporters in this poll, an Angus Reid poll, said that Israel was committing genocide, and only 28% disagreed. Now, one can only imagine what the numbers would be if the corporate media was doing its job and telling people the truth. But already the tide is turning against Israel in the public opinion in the West. And this is, I've just given you two examples. In the United States, there was a poll, which showed that some 36% believe that Israel's committing genocide. And the number amongst Democratic Party supporters was over 50%. That was several weeks ago. Ever since then, things have gotten worse. Public opinion is absolutely turning against Israel. The majority of people in the West, I think, now understand that what Israel is doing is, if not genocide, certainly severely violative of international law. But it is not yet enough to cause this political elite to come to their senses and do the minimally decent thing and put a stop to this slaughter. Outside of the West, I think public opinion is far more hostile towards Israel at this stage. This is the most, generally the most favorable media environment for Israel in the West, in the world, outside of Israel itself. And you can only imagine what the numbers. I mean, there was a poll done in Saudi Arabia which showed that 96% of the people of Saudi Arabia wanted the government to completely sever ties with Israel. And you just had in Brazil, to give you another example of how different things are in the non-Western world, the courageous leader of Brazil, Lula da Silva, just came right out and said several days ago that what Israel is doing is entirely comparable to what Hitler did to the Jewish people during World War II. And then when Israel had the predictable, elicited howls of indignation, he completely severed diplomatic relations with Israel. So there is absolutely, the state of Israel is now an international pariah. It's even achieved pariah status within the West itself. But so far, the political elites, for reasons that are really quite difficult to comprehend, are sticking by their guns and continuing to support this genocidal, monstrous regime.
Okay. I have to ask you about Rafa. I've been reading that the people have been fleeing Gaza, and Israel is telling them, you got to go to Rafa, hoping, I guess, that they would go into Egypt. But hasn't Egypt also come down with an ultimatum for the Jews, for Israel?
I don't know if I would call it an ultimatum. What Egypt has said, and let's remember that Egypt is critically reliant upon U.S. military aid as well. It gets $1.3 billion a year, I think, in U.S. military aid. It is currently in serious financial trouble, has been seeking a substantial multi-billion-dollar loan from the IMF, which of course is dominated by the United States. And its tyrannical leader, Sisi, is very much in the back pocket of the United States government and has been from the very beginning of his tenure. But despite all of that, he has said, his foreign ministry said that if Israel attacks Rafah, they might suspend the peace accord that was struck at Camp David between Egypt and Israel decades ago, which, by the way, led to the assassination of the former Egyptian president Anwar Sadat. You and I are old enough to remember that. So he's undoubtedly cognizant of the possibility that his population will turn against him en masse, and that he himself may be in peril. And so he's using language which is, certainly stronger than any language he's used in the past. But so far, he is cooperating in actual fact with the genocide. He's, as is, by the way, the monarchy of Jordan, as is the Saudi autocracy, despite its rhetoric, as is the United Arab Emirates. These are all pro-Western tyrannies that have been propped up by the United States government, and they could do much more themselves to bring an end to this genocide. Their rhetoric is increasingly aggressive and in many ways unprecedented, but that hasn't altered the reality on the ground that they are collaborating with Israel. So we'll see. And there's one piece of particularly disturbing news that has now been confirmed by satellite imagery, and that is that the Sisi, the dictator of Egypt, has his forces have begun to construct a security wall just on the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing, which is approximately large enough. If you crammed the 1.4 million desperate displaced persons in Rafah in there, you could probably keep them there for some period of time. Now, people are saying that this, with some justification, people are suspicious about why he's doing that, and whether or not he ultimately is going to cave in and allow those devastated Palestinians to pour through the Rafah border crossing and then become refugees in a small part of the Sinai Desert on the other side of the border. He claims, his government, that this is a precautionary measure, that he's going to do everything possible to prevent anybody from being displaced into the Egyptian side of the border, but he can't necessarily stop Israel from, for example, bombing the border wall between Egypt and Gaza and potentially causing a massive outflow of humanity into the Sinai Desert. So it remains to be seen what's going on here. But look, outside of these states that I've mentioned, there is absolutely meaningful opposition being mounted to Israel's genocidal assault. So Hezbollah, on the northern border of Israel, has escalated its attacks, as has Israel itself. It has begun to target areas that are deeper in Israel that it had not targeted previously since October 7th. Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, gave a speech a few days ago in which he pointedly reminded Israelis that Hezbollah's missiles can reach all the way to Eilat on the Red Sea. In other words, they cover the entirety of Israel. The Houthis in Yemen, despite the repeated attacks by the Americans and the British, and by the way, they could bring a stop to Houthi attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea by stopping the genocide in Gaza. The Houthis have been very clear about this. But rather than be deterred, within the last 24 to 48 hours, they struck a British vessel and 2 American vessels, and the British vessel was so severely damaged that the crew abandoned the ship and it began to take on water. And it's possible that it sunk completely. And that would be the first time that the Houthis since October 7th have actually sunk a cargo ship. This would have been a British cargo ship called the Rubimar. And so you see, meaningful resistance being mounted against Israel in other parts of the Middle East. The way this is heading, I've said this repeatedly, Regis, though, unless the United States reins in Israel, this is going to end, I believe, in a major, major regional war with catastrophic consequences, not just for the Middle East, but for the global economy.
Okay. I've been wondering and asking ever since October 7th, and increasingly, as Israel continues the massacre, the genocide, why have not the Arab and Muslim states come to their Palestinian brothers and sisters' defense? Now, you mentioned that several of these states are controlled by the United States. I think there's obviously a lot of money involved. There's a lot of business that's involved, where these states are afraid to turn against the United States. But can't they see what the United States is and has become? And don't they realize that they're next? I mean, all of that oil, which has created all this wealth and these monarchies there, the deep state, the United States, the globalist financial elite, they want to own it all. So, I mean, do you have a hard time believing? Now, you mentioned 90-some% of people in Saudi Arabia are against what Israel's doing. Can't we hope for an uprising in these Muslim states by the people? That's my question.
That's entirely possible. I'm not going to offer any predictions in that regard because I think we are in unprecedented territory here. Israel has never done as criminal as its behavior has been since the time of its creation in 1948. In the Nakba, the catastrophe of the Palestinian people that was inflicted upon them that year. It's never killed Palestinian civilians at this rate, and there's a quality to this criminality, Regis, which is quite extraordinary, where the Israeli soldiers who are committing these war crimes are reveling in them. They're celebrating them, and they're visibly attempting to maximize the suffering of Palestinian people and then publishing the evidence of their depravity for the whole world to see. It's just simply extraordinary. I don't know that anything like this has ever happened before. Certainly there have been monstrosities of this severity committed on prior occasions in human history. But, to see the people committing them flaunt the evidence of their depravity for the whole world to see, knowing full well that they are exposing themselves potentially to criminal liability, I think that that's unprecedented. So we're really in uncharted territory here. And it's entirely possible that the Middle East will explode at the grassroots level, and that we will see some serious acts of people-oriented regime change implemented on a scale we've not previously witnessed. I really, it's so hard to predict where this is all going to go. I think, as I say, that at a bare minimum, what we can say with confidence is that the leaders of these countries that I've identified, they're not the only ones, but principally it's the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, which have collaborated in the oppression of the Palestinian people with the state of Israel and the United States. They are coming under intense pressure. And just today, as you and I were discussing before we began our discussion on air, the representatives of the Saudi government at the International Court of Justice in another legal proceeding, which relates to the illegality of Israel's occupation, was blasting the Israeli government before the International Court of Justice in the harshest possible terms for the occupation, and demanding that it be brought to an end immediately without conditions. So again, this is quite unprecedented, and I think it's really a sign of the pressure that these tyrannies are coming under. They're not omnipotent. If their people turned against them en masse, notwithstanding the weaponry, the military force, the security forces at their disposal, they will not be able to resist. As I said, we've seen this before. We saw it when Anwar Sadat was assassinated after making a peace deal with Israel. Whatever happens, though, even if they don't overthrow the peoples of these countries, overthrow the despots who rule them with the support of the United States and other Western countries, there is enough opposition within the Middle East, not just at the ground roots level, but at the state level, and at the level of movements like the Houthi movement, or the Ansar movement. I shouldn't say Houthi movement, because the Houthis are people. It's not a movement. The movement is Ansar. And then you have, of course, Hezbollah, which is a quasi-state actor. You have militant groups in Iraq. You have Syria. You have the Syrian government itself. Collectively, the forces that are equipped and minded to act could deal a devastating blow to Israel if they bring to bear the full force of their military capability. So far, they've not done that. I mean, Hezbollah alone, without any direct intervention by Iran, could deal an unprecedented and devastating blow to Israel with its massive missile arsenal, and we're heading in that direction right now.
All right, we've got to mention Iran. It was reported earlier this week that Israel bombed Iran. I don't know if it was an oil facility or what it was, but it was deep into Iran. Iran has not responded directly, but supposedly, allegedly, and it's alleged by Israel, Iran is supporting Hezbollah and Hamas with technology, with aid, with money. I don't know. The thing that drives me crazy is Israel's got to be out of their freaking minds when they dare to bomb Iran, which is a huge country, a powerful country with its own enormous missile arsenal of all types. I mean, Iran could sink every American aircraft carrier or battleship in the Mediterranean, as well as possibly destroy most of Israel. Are they that, I don't know, maniacal? Are they that psychopathic that they dare to try to drag Iran directly into this? And it's been well known that Israel was the one that committed assassinations of Iran's nuclear scientists and attacks on their nuclear facilities. I mean, Dimitri, what do you make of that?
They want a war with Iran. I mean, there's absolutely no question they want a war with Iran. What actually was reported was that the Israelis somehow masterminded the destruction of gas pipelines in Iran, and this was reported by none other than the New York Times, a very pro-Israel media organization. But we don't, even if we just put that aside, there has been one provocation after another by Israel. You mentioned a number of them. There have been cyber attacks. There have been repeated attacks on Iranian military personnel in Syria. They've killed senior officials. Israel has killed senior officials in the Iranian military in Syria within the past several months. They've been doing this for quite some time. And it's important to recall that the Iranian forces that are in Syria are there at the request and with the consent of the internationally recognized government of Bashar al-Assad. Whatever you may think of Bashar al-Assad, under international law, he is the representative of the state of Syria, and he's invited these forces in. So Israel has absolutely no grounds as a legal matter, nor as a moral matter for that matter, to attack Iranian military personnel or other Iranian citizens in Syria or elsewhere. It's committed one act of war after another against Iran, and it's very clear what its end game is. It wants to provoke a large-scale attack on. It's actually trying to provoke a large-scale attack on Israel from Iran because it believes strongly, probably with justification, that at that point the United States government will have no alternative but to attack Iran massively. The game that Israel is playing, though, and the reason why it just doesn't, Israel could just openly and brazenly launch a military attack on Iran, and it has the wherewithal to deliver. I don't think it has the ability to defeat Iran militarily, but it could inflict, with the military power that it currently has, significant damage on Iran. It could do it openly. It could do it in such a way that it forces Iran's hand. But if it does that, and it's seen in the West to have provoked a large-scale attack from Iran, it's going to be very difficult for the United States government to justify its military becoming embroiled in a devastating war with Iran. So the game it's playing is to provoke Iran just enough to elicit a large-scale attack from Iran without being seen by Western electorates, and particularly the people in the United States, as being responsible for the war. They want it to look as though Iran is the aggressor, so that the United States government will not be impeded by public opinion from acting at the behest of Israel to attack Iran. That's what they want. It's very clear. They've been trying to engineer this for years, and they've escalated their efforts to engineer a full-blown war with Iran to unprecedented levels since the genocide began on October 7th. And they're doing the same thing with Hezbollah, Regis. They could launch very easily. It'd be much more easy for them to launch a devastating attack on Lebanon than on Iran. They could do that. And then the missiles would be flying into Israeli cities, causing massive destruction. But then, the world would see, without any question, and particularly the United States, the people of the United States would see that Israel provoked the large-scale attack from Hezbollah. And then the Biden administration would have much more difficulty in intervening directly in a war between Hezbollah and Israel. So they're playing the same sick, deranged game with Hezbollah. I want to be very clear about this, Regis. People need to understand that Israel is not our ally. Israel is our enemy. When I say our, I'm talking about the people of the West. Israel is trying desperately to drag us into a war that's going to have catastrophic consequences for the entire world, including for ordinary citizens all throughout the West. At a very minimum, if a full-blown war breaks out with Iran and Hezbollah, the price of you can just forget about any maritime shipping of oil out of this oil-rich region, either through the Strait of Hormuz or through the Red Sea. This is going to cause an extraordinary increase in the price of oil, probably to unprecedented levels. It is going to cause a devastatingly negative impact on the global economy. The IMF and the World Bank a week ago issued a warning. Again, these are hardly, pro-Palestinian organizations. They're largely controlled by the United States government. They issued a warning that the hostilities in the Middle East have already caused severe damage to the economies of North Africa and the Middle East, and that if it escalates, it could constitute a threat to the global financial system, which is absolutely true. This is not scaremongering. I mean, even within the United States in the past year, before this genocide began and all of these hostilities escalated, there were major bank failures in the United States. In Europe, the banking system has never really recovered from the devastation of the 2009-2010 financial crisis. It's basically been kept on life support by the European Central Bank since that time. You know, a sharp and unprecedented increase in the price of oil over and above the damage that's already been done to the European economy by cutting off its access to Russian natural resources could very well result in the collapse of the European financial system, major banking corporations coming down. This is all being put into play. This is all becoming increasingly likely because of Israel. So I say it again, people in the West, you need to understand, Israel is not your ally. Israel is your enemy.
I want to interject something else, Dimitri, that I have to think is in play. It's very well known, but it's never been internationally recognized. Israel is a nuclear state. They have nuclear weapons. I have to think that what's behind the leaders of Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and the governments in places like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, they know what Israel has, and they know that if Israel is attacked overwhelmingly, as you've been talking about, it's these other countries certainly have the capability of doing it. Israel, as a final act of desperation, would let everything go in their nuclear arsenal. There'd be another enormous Dead Sea all over the Middle East. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm so glad you raised this this critically important question, Regis, because it's barely mentioned in the discussions about what is happening in the Middle East, but it's an absolutely critical factor. And let's just be very clear. Israel unquestionably has a nuclear arsenal, even though it's never officially admitted this, because if it admitted this, then it would be very difficult for the United States. The United States would actually be prohibited by law, as I understand it, from providing military aid to Israel. And, you know, not only do we know this through a variety of sources, but after the genocide began, one of the lunatics in Netanyahu's cabinet, I think it was Ben-Gvir, one of the so-called far-right ministers. And by the way, everybody in Netanyahu's cabinet, every single one of them is a fascist. To suggest that there's just a couple of bad apples in there is lunacy. Okay, but the worst of them came out and said that nuking Gaza was an option. And, you know, Netanyahu went ballistic. He didn't remove him from the cabinet because Netanyahu relies upon this man's political party to keep his coalition together, but he suspended him temporarily from his duties as a minister because he was potentially creating a situation where the United States government would be forced to cut off military aid to Israel. There's no question they have nukes. Absolutely no question. There's no question they have dozens of them, possibly a couple of hundred of them, maybe even more than a couple of hundred nukes. And I completely agree that these people are entirely capable of using those nukes. Absolutely. And I think that this is part of the reason why you've seen this level of restraint from Iran. Hezbollah, you know, it paradoxically is in a less vulnerable position than Iran. It is more vulnerable than Iran to a conventional attack because it doesn't have the military forces that the Iranian military, the military weaponry that the Iranian military possesses. It doesn't have an army the size of the Iranian army, anywhere close to as big as the Iranian army. And it's right next to Israel, which makes it much easier for Israel to invade Lebanon, southern Lebanon by land, obviously. But it's protected in the sense that if Israel contemplated the use of nuclear weapons, it couldn't attack Hezbollah's military forces without doing immense damage to Israel itself. The proximity of Hezbollah and South Lebanon to the major Israeli population centers effectively precludes that as an option. That is not a deterrent when it comes to Iran. You know, in theory, the Israelis could launch a nuclear strike on Iran without, you know, at least in terms of the radioactive fallout, causing massive damage to the Israeli population itself. So Iran is much more vulnerable, and I think that surely must be a factor in the Iranian government's restraint. They must be saying, look, to the extent that there's going to be military action taken, it's much better that it be done by forces that are proximate to Israel, because they're relatively immune from nuclear attack, but we are not. And just as I understand it, by the way, and I think it was Scott Ritter who was discussing this some time ago, the Iranians have the ability, even if they're attacked with a nuclear weapon, they've already prepared for that eventuality. They could still deliver. It's a very large country. They've taken great care to protect their conventional missile arsenal from attack. They've spread it out all over the country. It's well hidden. It's deep underground. They could still deliver an absolutely devastating blow to Israel, even if Israel nukes Iran. They prepared for that eventuality, but obviously they don't want to be subjected to a nuclear attack. I think that absolutely has to be a factor in their restraint. At the end of the day, though, whatever may or may not be motivating Iran to exercise the restraint that it's shown thus far in the face of these endless provocations, Regis, we need to be having a discussion here in the West about this problem, because these people are capable. The Netanyahu and his cabinet are eminently capable of using nukes. And I mean, these people are so outside the realm of the international legal architecture and set up with respect to nuclear weapons. They're the only state in the Middle East that have not acceded to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the only one. So they're not subject to any form of inspection at the international level at all. And who knows what their capabilities are. We should assume the worst, and our governments need to take action as quickly as possible before these maniacs ignite a nuclear war.
Well, anybody who speaks out against Israel and what they're doing is automatically labeled anti-Semitic. They paint everybody with that brush, and they do it quickly and easily. They're very good at destroying people, reputations, and also eliminating people. They've shown they're perfectly willing and capable of doing that. But personally, I do not believe this is the Jewish people. And we've made this distinction before, and many people are making it now and seeing it. I see posts all over Facebook. This is Zionism. And Zionism has nothing to do except that it captured Judaism. Is not even a sect. It's more of an ideology, and its design, its purpose is to conquer and subdue the rest of the world. This for me, I don't know, I have a hard time dealing with it. And when I look at my country, the United States of America, most of the people in Congress many have dual citizenship. They're all pro-Israel. They all go to IPAC. They get their funding from IPAC. They couldn't get elected and stay elected if they weren't pro-Israel. And, this is just a terrible, I want to call it a lie. It's just a terrible lie, not a myth, that has been ingrained in most of the United States and the West. What are your thoughts on that before we finish?
I absolutely agree that Zionism is an ideology. I wouldn't say that the objective of Zionism is global domination. It's, I think, regional domination is certainly an objective of Zionism, and expansionism within the region where Israel is situated. I think the more fanatical Zionists would absolutely like to see Israel seize control of the Sinai again. They'd like to see Israel control and annex the portion of South Lebanon that is south of the Litani River. They've already annexed the Golan Heights, which is unquestionably under international law Syrian territory, and perhaps even parts of Jordan. So absolutely, this is an expansionist ideology. It is a supremacist ideology. It is a fascistic ideology. And it's got nothing to do with Judaism. Absolutely nothing. In fact, I haven't seen ironclad numbers on this, but I suspect, Regis, that the majority of Zionists are not even Jewish today. They're not even self-professed Jews. They're Christian evangelicals. A huge proportion of the Zionist population is Christian evangelicals. A lot of Zionists are not either Jewish or Christian. They're secular. There are even atheists who are Zionists. The fact that there are people within, the Jewish community, a large and growing proportion of the Jewish community globally, who are adamantly opposed to Israel's project of expansionism and Jewish supremacy, can't be denied. I mean, I've worked extensively in Canada with a wonderful organization called Independent Jewish Voices, who has members across the country, a number of them very leading, eloquent, principled members of the Jewish community who are tireless in their defense of the Palestinian people and their human rights. You have Jewish Voice for Peace in the United States. You have another organization called If Not Now. You have organizations sprouting up everywhere within the Jewish community in the Western world and beyond that are leading the movement, playing a very, very important leadership role in the movement within Western countries in particular to end Western government support for Israel. The claim that Israel is a Jewish state and that this maniacal, racist, lawless regime represents the Jewish people is itself anti-Semitic. I cannot stress that enough. It's anti-Semitic, and it runs the risk of creating and exacerbating. There always has been, tragically, anti-Semitism in our society, independently of the existence of Israel. But Israel's claim to be the representative of the Jewish people, even as it commits a genocide and brutalizes states in violation of international law, is almost certainly exacerbating hostility towards the Jewish people. And there are many wonderful people in the Jewish community who are acutely aware of this danger and who are doing everything possible to counteract it. Those of us who struggle for the Palestinian cause, it's unfortunate, but we just have to allow these smears of anti-Semitism to kind of, roll off our backs like water on the back of a duck, because it's just part of the landscape. You have to put up with it, sadly. We can't be deterred by that. And we have to constantly remind our fellow citizens that Israel is not, despite all its claims to the contrary, representative of the Jewish people, and in fact is fundamentally violating the core values of the Jewish people.
Dimitri, I want to thank you for another fascinating discussion. We'll look forward to doing it again real soon. And thanks for being my test case. Our first Dateline live show. We had a couple of our friends post things in the chat, and I put them up on the screen. Hopefully, as time goes on, we'll get more and more people that will get involved with us, and they'll be able to interact by using the chat. It works very well for so many others that I've seen, and hopefully it'll help people interact with people like yourself. Take care, my friend.
You too, Regis. Great talking to you.